The night Odell Marsh showed up at Lena Pruitt's auto shop, she almost didn't open the door. It was past 11. The rain had been coming down hard since sundown, the kind of rain that floods the ditches along Route 9 and turns the gravel lot outside into a shallow lake. Lena had been under a '09 Silverado for the past 3 hours, trying to track down an oil leak that the owner swore was there and that she'd been convinced until about 40 minutes ago. Wasn't, it was there. It was always there. People didn't make up oil leaks. She heard the knock over the radio. Not loud, almost polite, which surprised her because the truck outside, she'd seen the headlights sweep across the bay window, was not a polite kind of truck. It was a lifted Ram with KC lights and mud on every panel up to the door handles, and it had pulled in fast, the way people pull in when they're either lost or desperate. Sometimes both. Lena slid out from under the Silverado and wiped her hands on the shop rag tucked into her back pocket. She was 26 years old, and she ran Pruitt Auto and Repair alone, which meant she made every decision in this building, including whether to open the door at 11 at night in a storm to a stranger. She opened it. The man standing on the other side was big. Not threatening big. More like he'd spent his whole life doing physical work, and his body had just accepted that as fact. He was wearing a soaked canvas jacket with the sleeves pushed up, and he had the look of someone who had not slept in a while. Behind him, sitting on the tailgate of the Ram, were 2 other men and a woman, all of them wet. All of them watching Lena with the particular expression of people who had already been told no too many times tonight to expect anything different. "Ma'am," the big man said. He had a low voice, unhurried. "I'm sorry for the hour. My name's Odell Marsh. I know. Don't say it. My mama liked the name." He almost smiled. "We got a situation. My cousin Darnett, she's been driving since this morning and she's having chest pains. We don't think it's a heart attack, but we're not sure. And the urgent care up the road is closed, and—" He stopped, looked at his boots. "We've tried 4 other places tonight. Gas station up on 7 told us to move on. Diner said they were closing. Man at the motel told us the lot was full, but there were 6 empty spaces right there in the lot. I'm not looking for charity. I just need somewhere dry to put her while we figure out the next step." Lena looked past him at the woman on the tailgate. Darnett was maybe 40, leaning against one of the other men with her eyes half closed, one hand pressed flat against her sternum. "Bring her inside," Lena said. Darnett's name was Darnett Foss, and she was a respiratory therapist from Baton Rouge who had been driving up to Nashville for her nephew's graduation. When the chest pains started somewhere around the state line, she'd pulled over 3 times. The second time, she'd told Odell she thought she was dying. He'd told her she wasn't allowed to. Lena got her into the office, the one room in the shop that had a couch, a space heater, and a door that closed, and called her neighbor Mrs. Yoon, who was a retired ER nurse and who Lena had woken up before for exactly this kind of thing, and who picked up on the second ring and asked how old and what symptoms and told Lena to keep her still and watch her color. The 2 men who'd been with Odell came in from the rain. One introduced himself as Tyrese, who turned out to be Darnett's brother, a freight truck driver who'd been on his way home to Memphis when he'd gotten the call. The other was Gus, quieter, who sat down on the step stool by the tool chest and didn't say much, but every few minutes he'd check on Darnett through the office window like clockwork. Lena put coffee on. It was the least she could do and also the most practical thing, and she had learned early that practical things matter in a crisis. Odell found her in the break room while the pot was still running. He looked around at the shelves of used parts, the laminated AAC certifications on the wall, the whiteboard with the week's appointments written out in blue marker. His eyes stopped on the certifications the way people's eyes sometimes did, with a kind of recalibration. Like they'd expected one thing and gotten another. "This your place," he said. "Since I was 22, Lena said. He nodded slowly. "Your people in the business?" "My grandfather was. I grew up in his shop. When he passed, the building went to my uncle, who didn't want it. I bought it off him for $8,000 and a used transmission." She handed Odell a mug. He thought he was getting the better end of that deal. Odell laughed. A real one. The kind that surprised him. "Where'd you come up with $8,000 at 22? "Saved it," she said. 4 years of working weekends at the Ford dealership in town. Oil changes, tire rotations, whatever they'd let me touch. She poured herself a mug. They didn't let me touch much at first. Took about a year before they stopped sending me back to the waiting room when anything complicated came in. Odell was quiet for a moment. People do that a lot? They do, she said without bitterness, because there wasn't any left. She'd spent it all a long time ago. They stop. By midnight, the rain had let up enough that you could hear yourself think. Darnett's color had improved, and Mrs. Yoon, who'd arrived in her rain jacket with a blood pressure cuff and the calm authority of someone who'd spent 30 years in emergency medicine, had determined that what Darnett was experiencing was likely a severe muscle spasm aggravated by stress and 8 hours of driving, not her heart. She'd given her 2 ibuprofen and told her to lie down for an hour before anyone decided anything else. Tyrese let out a long breath and sat down on the shop floor with his back against the tire rack. He looked up at the fluorescent lights for a long time. We stopped at a church first, he said, to no one in particular, before the gas station, before the diner. It was a big church, you know the kind, white building, nice sign out front with the little movable letters. Lights were still on inside. He paused. We knocked. Man came to the door and looked out at us through the glass for about 10 seconds. Then, the lights went off. Nobody said anything. I'm just saying, Tyrese said. I'm just saying that I want to remember this. He looked at Lena. I want to remember that somebody opened the door. Lena didn't know what to say to that. She went back to the Silverado. She found out more about them over the next 2 hours, the way you always find out about people when there's nothing to do but wait. Tyrese had been driving long haul since he was 23. He knew every truck stop between Mobile and Cincinnati by name, by which ones had decent food and which ones you didn't linger in. He was saving up to buy a small piece of land outside of Memphis, where he planned to grow tomatoes and, eventually, retire. He talked about the tomatoes with the same sincerity that other people reserved for children or religion. Gus, whose full name turned out to be Augustus Lavelle Boateng, which he offered unprompted with the air of someone who'd long since made peace with it, was a former Army medic who'd done a tour and a half overseas before a roadside device had ended that chapter. He worked now as a home health aide on the west side of Nashville, 7 days on and 7 days off. He said he'd been in the truck because Odell had called him when Darnett started feeling bad, because Odell trusted Gus's medical judgment more than anyone else's, which Gus seemed mildly embarrassed about. And Odell Marsh was a welder from Decatur, Alabama, who'd been laid off 2 years ago when the plant shut down and who had spent the subsequent 14 months doing contract work wherever he could find it. Refineries, bridge repairs, wherever something needed to be joined and nobody local wanted to do it. He sent money home every week to his mother, who was 64 and living alone, and who he called every Sunday morning without fail. He'd driven 4 hours tonight because his cousin needed him, and because that was the kind of person he was. He didn't say that part. Lena figured it out herself. Around 2 in the morning, she was closing up the hood of the Silverado. She'd found a second oil seal that needed replacing, which she hadn't billed for because the customer had already paid, when Odell came out of the office where Darnett was sleeping. She's out, he said. Gus says she should be fine to drive in the morning if she takes it slow. Good, Lena said. Odell stood there for a moment. He had his jacket off now, and she could see that his arms were marked up with old work scars, the particular kind that welders get, small pockmarks from spatter, and a longer one on his forearm that looked like a burn that had healed badly. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. Why'd you open the door? Lena set down her wrench. She thought about it, honestly, the way she tried to think about things when she bothered to think about them at all. My grandfather used to say that a closed shop is just a building, she said. An open one is something else. She picked up the wrench again. I don't know if that's a philosophy or just something he said, but I've never locked that door at night without thinking about it. Odell was quiet. Then he said, Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I ever knew, Lena said, and he'd have been furious that I let you all sleep on my shop floor without offering you something to eat first. So let me see what I've got. She had half a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, some string cheese that wasn't quite expired, and, in the mini fridge under the parts counter, 3 leftover biscuits from the diner down the road that she'd been planning to eat for breakfast. She put it all out on the folding table in the break room without apology, and the 4 of them ate standing up at 2:15 in the morning, and it was one of those meals that has nothing to do with the food. Tyrus told a story about a blizzard in Indiana 3 years ago, being stuck on I-70 for 9 hours, and a woman who'd walked up and down the line of stranded trucks passing out thermoses of hot cocoa. He said he'd never gotten her name, said he still thought about her sometimes when the weather got bad. Gus said that in the army there was a rule, informal but real, that you fed people first and sorted everything else out second. He said he'd seen it work in places where nothing else did. Odell didn't say much. He ate his biscuit and looked at the ASE certifications again. After a while, he said quietly, "My daughter wants to be a mechanic." Lena looked up. "She's 13, he said. Gets under my truck every chance she gets. Drives her mother crazy." He paused. "People keep telling her she should pick something else." Lena understood what he wasn't saying. "What's her name?" she asked. "Nadia," he said. "Tell Nadia." Lena said slowly, "That Pruitt Auto and Repair on Route 9 in Calhoun County offers a summer apprenticeship for anyone 16 or older who can tell me the difference between a ball joint and a tie rod end." She looked at him directly, and that the woman who runs it started changing oil when she was 11 years old in her grandfather's shop and turned out just fine. Odell looked at her for a moment. His jaw moved slightly, like he was working something out. "I'll tell her," he said. They were gone by 7. The next morning, Darnette rested and moving carefully but with color back in her face. She hugged Lena at the door for longer than strangers usually hug and said into her shoulder, "I'm going to remember you." Then she caught herself and laughed and said, "That sounds like something you say to a ghost." "I'm not a ghost," Lena said. "I'm just a mechanic." Darnette laughed again and let go. Tyrese shook her hand, a real handshake, both of his around one of hers, and told her that the next time his rig came through this part of the state, he was stopping to have his brakes checked, whether they needed it or not. Gus gave a short nod, which she had already learned was his version of a speech. Odell was last. He stood by the driver's door of the Ram for a second. He looked like he was going to say something, and then changed his mind. "Thank you," was what came out. Just that. She watched the truck pull out of the lot and back onto Route 9, taillights disappearing in the early morning mist. Then she went back inside and started a fresh pot of coffee and turned the radio on and pulled out the parts invoice for the Silverado because the world kept going and the work kept coming. And that was fine. That was more than fine. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, a truck she didn't recognize pulled into the lot, then another, then a third, then a flatbed with a new lift system strapped down on the back, the commercial kind, rated for heavy vehicles, the kind that costs $12,000 new. Lena walked out of the bay. There were 11 people in the lot. Odell was there, Tyrese, Gus, Darnette, who was standing near the back and who lifted her hand in a small wave when she saw Lena's face. There were others she didn't know. A woman in coveralls with an embroidery shop name stitched over her pocket, a tall man with a clipboard, 2 younger guys who were already unstrapping the flatbed. Odell stepped forward. "We want to be clear," he said before she could speak. "This isn't charity." Lena crossed her arms. "I didn't say anything. You were about to." She was in fact about to. "Tyrese made some calls," Odell said. "Some of his contacts, people he's been moving freight for years. There's a trucking co-op out of Huntsville that's been looking for a reliable independent shop in this corridor. Someone who can service commercial vehicles, do fleet inspections, handle DOT compliance checks." He glanced at the lift on the flatbed. "You can't do that with the equipment you've got, but you could with that." Lena looked at the lift, then at the people in her lot. "Why?" she said. It wasn't accusatory. She genuinely wanted to understand. Odell put his hands in his jacket pockets and thought about it. "Because we've all been the people on the wrong side of a closed door," he said finally. "And when somebody opens theirs, it means something." He looked at her steadily. "And because you're good at what you do and you deserve to have the tools to prove it to people who otherwise wouldn't give you the chance." Nobody spoke for a moment. "The co-op contract is real," the tall man with the clipboard said. He held it out toward her. 12 vehicles to start. 6-month trial period. Terms are on page 3. Lena took the clipboard. She read page 3. She read it again. The numbers were honest. The terms were fair. The kind of contract she had spent 4 years telling herself might exist for someone like her somewhere, if she just kept the bays clean and the work good and the door open. She had mostly believed it and sometimes not believed it, and on a few late nights she had not believed it at all. She looked up. "I'm going to need to put a second bay in," she said. "The foundation on the south side can support it. I've had a contractor look at it." Odell almost smiled. "I know, a welder," he said. The lift went in the following Saturday. The second bay took 3 months, came in $1,100 under the first estimate, and Odell did every weld on the structural frame himself and didn't charge her $1. He said his daughter was watching some of it on video call and he wanted her to see the work done right. Lena made sure to explain each step loud enough for the phone to hear. The co-op contract renewed after 6 months. Then again. By the following spring, Pruitt Auto and Repair was running 3 bays, had 2 part-time employees, and was on a first-name basis with the dispatcher at the Huntsville office. Nadia Marsh came the summer. She turned 16. She stayed 8 weeks. She could already tell the difference between a ball joint and a tie rod end on the first day. She'd looked it up the night after her father told her about the offer, and by the 3rd week she was diagnosing sensor faults on a 2015 Peterbilt with the calm focus of someone who had been doing it for years. At the end of her last day, she stood in the bay with grease on her forearms and said, "I want to own a shop." Lena handed her a rack. "Then own one," she said. "There's something people don't tell you about keeping a door open. They make it sound passive, like it's just the absence of locking something. But it isn't passive. It's a choice you make every single time, especially when it's late and the rain is coming down, and you're tired and you don't know who's on the other side." Lena Pruitt made that choice on a night in November when she had no reason to expect anything from it. What came back to her wasn't magic. It wasn't luck in the storybook sense. It was people who remembered being helped and chose to help in return. It was a welder who called in favors, a truck driver who knew the right people, a medic who showed up because someone asked him to, a 13-year-old girl who wrote down the name of a shop and waited 3 years to walk through its door. That's how it works, mostly, not in grand gestures, in people remembering. In a door that stayed unlocked when it could have been locked, and everything that followed from that one small decision. The light is still on at Pruitt Auto and Repair at 11 o'clock on a rainy night. It always has been. It always will be.